All right. So we have 3 budget hearings and 3 recommendations today. We will start with the budget hearing on the Kansas Department of Corrections.
Am I good to go? Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Nicole Renter. I'm a fiscal analyst with KLRD, and I will be presenting the budget for the Kansas Department of Corrections. Before we get started, one of the sheets that you had handed out was the governor's differences from the Legislative Budget Committee. I did just want to note that there's an error. Item number 2, the new LCF warehouse, that is incorrect. As you can see, it's also item number 7. But number 2 is incorrect because that is SGF funds, and it should be SIBF funds. So I just wanted to point that out before we got started. And then for the Kansas Department of Corrections, for this budget summary, because the facilities have all been split out into their own budget summaries, this one will just be the central office and the Kansas Correctional Industries. There's also a number of people from the Department of Corrections here that will be available to answer any questions, but it'll be Keith Bradshaw, the Executive Director of Contracts and Finance, has a presentation to give after this budget summary. So if you would turn to page 2, we can get started with the fiscal year 25. Fiscal year 25 approved amount was $371 million, including $332 million SGF. The agency deleted $10.6 million SGF, but added $12.2 million in all other funds for an overall total of $373 million, which is an increase of $1.6 million or 0.4% above the approved. With the changes, there was an SGF reappropriation. Item 1, the agency carried over $20.4 million in unspent SGF monies into fiscal year 25. An additional $32.7 million SGF in budgeted reappropriations was included from the 24 legislative approved amount. So that's why it was a total reappropriations of around $53 million, I believe, but you'll only see the SGF reappropriation of $20 million because of the added in budgeted reappropriation already in the approved amount. So the reappropriations include the evidence-based juvenile program. Agency reappropriated $38.2 million SGF, including $32.7 million SGF in planned reappropriations for expenditures in the evidence-based juvenile program. The LBC then deleted the $38.2 million SGF to remove the reappropriations. Other reappropriation was a Lansing Correctional Facility Career Campus. The agency reappropriated $10 million SGF due to funds for the Lansing Correctional Facility Career Campus being appropriated too late in the fiscal year and being unable to secure matching funds. The LBC deleted these funds for the reappropriation. Operations, the agency reappropriated $4.9 million SGF for expenditures in other operating accounts. These accounts include treatment programs, equipment replacement, capital improvements, local jail payments, purchase of services, and other operating expenditures. The LBC deleted $4 million SGF of these reappropriations. The agency also reappropriated $188,000, all from the Correctional Institutions Building Funds. The agency did not have any supplemental requests. So their other changes were a shrinkage reduction. Item 4, the agency deleted $19.5 million SGF for shrinkage reduction across all facilities. The 24 legislature approved the KDOC system-wide request to reduce the shrinkage rate, and so the funds were transferred from the central office budget to the facilities. So you will see a corresponding increase in the facilities. Item 5, the evidence-based programs. Agency added $12.4 million SGF for increased expenditures for the evidence-based juvenile program. Per the direction of the division of the budget, all reappropriated funds in the evidence-based programs budget unit have been budgeted in fiscal year 25. Item 6, the Kansas Correctional Industries. Agency added $8.3 million, all from special revenue funds, for increased expenditures by the Kansas Correctional Industries. A majority of this increase comes from the fiscal year 24 expenses for new construction at TCF and WCF being paid in fiscal year 25. If you turn the page, item 7, all other adjustments. Agency added $206,635, also from special revenue funds for all other adjustments. The agency added $3.7 million, all from special revenue funds, which was offset by a deletion of $3.5 million SGF. The SGF decrease is attributable to a reduction in juvenile corrections, operating expenditures, and hepatitis C treatment, and the agency also added 0.5 FTE positions, which the LBC then deleted the 0.5 FTE. Are there any questions on fiscal year 25 before I move on to fiscal year 26?
Any questions on 25? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you. Before you started, I thought you said number 2 had an error.
On the governor's differences, the yellow sheet that you got.
Okay, we're on this sheet.
Yes, that's why, before we started, I just wanted to point that out for anybody who was looking at it. We haven't gotten to, it's under fiscal year 2026, item number 2.
I'm still looking for it. I'm sorry. Governor's difference.
Item number 2, it's the new LCF warehouse.
LCF warehouse, okay. That's
Yes,
what I
so
needed.
you'll see it's also item number 7. The only difference is one is SGF and one is SIBF. The governor did not recommend it as the SGF funds.
Okay.
But I forgot to unclick that box in the
Okay.
database.
And then just general question on page 3, number 4, shrinkage reduction. Shrinkage to me is theft items. Is that what this is, or what is
So
shrinkage?
is done differently in agencies. So it is, oh gosh, how to explain shrinkage? I will find the. So it's usually the full salaries and wages funding for an agency is based on every position being filled for an entire fiscal year. So it's shrinkage or savings in salary and wages expenditures. So it's basically the cost that they expect to be paid for salaries versus the cost that they actually paid in salaries, I believe, is my understanding of it. Keith can come up afterwards later and describe how it applies exactly to the facilities.
Any further questions on 25? All right, let's go to 26.
Okay. For fiscal year 26, the fiscal year 25 approved amount is $351 million. The agency request is $785.6 million, or $435 million, or 124% above the approved amount. This increase is largely due to the agency's enhancement requests, starting on item 1, which the LBC, of course, deleted all enhancement requests. I would also like to ask the chair, when I'm going through, would you like me to point out which ones the governor recommended and which ones she did not recommend?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, so item number 1, fully fund the medical contract. The agency requests an additional 2.8 million SGF to fully fund the healthcare contract. This contract includes an annual escalator of 3% for fiscal year 26. Increase is partially offset by projected staffing deductions and performance guarantees, and includes a per capita increase to account for the continued growth in the population. I believe the GovRec was to increase the request to 8.3 million due to the agency renegotiating their contract. There was also, the governor's recommended a supplemental for fiscal year 25 to fully fund the medical contract. I believe the agency has that in their presentation. So if you turn to page 2, fully fund the food service, the agency is requesting 1.7 million SGF to fully fund the food service contract. The fiscal year 26 estimate includes a 4% increase in cost per meal and an average daily population of 9,800, resulting in a 1.7 million increase over current funding. The governor did recommend this. The TCF support medical building debt service. The agency is requesting 3 million SGF for building debt services. The 24 legislature authorized the agency to obtain bond financing for the construction of a new medical support service building at TCF. Bonds will be issued in fiscal year 25, and funding is requested for the debt service payments. The governor's recommendation was to add this and 2 other debt service payments to the Department of Administration. Item 4, fund deferred rehab and repair. Agency is requesting 8.6 million SGF to fund deferred rehab and repair projects. The rehab and repair projects are funded through an appropriation from the Correctional Institutions Building Fund. Statute caps the amount transferred to that fund from the State Gaming Revenue Fund at 4.8 million, less the portion that is appropriated to the Department of Administration for Building Insurance. So the agency states that some of the priority projects in fiscal year 25 were moved to fiscal year 26 due to funding limitations. This was part of the governor's recommendation. Item 5, replace Hutchinson Correctional Facility. The agency requests an additional 453 million SGF to build a new Hutchinson Correctional Facility. The current facility no longer complies with standard safety requirements, lacks the ability to effectively cool and heat living units, and requires extensive maintenance. A third-party report identified at least 80.2 million in capital needs over a 10-year period. And the new facility would provide a total capacity of 2,192 beds, which is an increase of 414 beds. The governor did not recommend this enhancement. The next page, item 6, select LCF raising projects. The agency requests an additional 5.5 million SGF to demolish select buildings within the old Lansing Correctional Facility maximum security compound. The removal of these buildings will make space for other buildings, such as the Lansing Career Campus and a new warehouse, which is item 7. The buildings that are capable of being restored for use as part of a museum will remain. And this is one of them where the governor recommended it, but using SIBF funds instead of SGF funds. Same with item 7, the new LCF warehouse that I was mentioning earlier. Agency requests additional 5.5 million SGF to construct a 25,000 square foot metal warehouse at Lansing Correctional Facility. Governor recommended this using SIBF funds instead of SGF. Item 8, convert H-dorm for work release at TCF. The agency requests an additional 5.5 million SGF to convert the H-dorm into a work release area at the Topeka Correctional Facility. Renovation of the old KCI showroom would provide 40 work release beds separate from general population residents. The governor did not recommend this enhancement. Item 9, new laundry at TCF. The agency requests an additional 4.3 million SGF to construct a new laundry building at the Topeka Correctional Facility. Currently, laundry services are consolidated with the Kansas Juvenile Correctional Complex, with operations taking place over there. The combined laundry serves about 180 juveniles and 900 adults and requires one full-time staff person for the delivery of laundry carts between TCF and KJCC. So the new laundry would be located within the I&J unit to provide jobs to higher security residents who are ineligible for private industries programs. The governor did not recommend this enhancement. Page 8, we're out of the enhancements now, and these are other adjustments. Shrinkage reduction, the agency deleted 19.6 million SGF to reduce the shrinkage allocation to 5%. Number 11, evidence-based programs. The agency deleted 32.7 million SGF in the evidence-based juvenile program. The 25 approved amount has a planned reappropriation built into it that's not in the fiscal year 26 budget request. So it's not quite that they're removing the funds, it's more that we're showing the change from the fiscal year 25 approved amount. Number 12, all other adjustments. The agency deleted 2.7 million, including 1.4 million SGF, and added 0.5 FTE positions for all other adjustments. And the LBC deleted the 0.5 FTE. Are there any questions for fiscal year 26, or I can move on to the capital improvement section?
Any questions for 26? Let's go to capital improvements.
Okay. For fiscal year 25, the agency submits a revised estimate of 40.2 million in capital improvement expenditures in fiscal year 2025, including 24.4 million SGF. The revised estimate includes item 1, priority capital improvement projects. Agency estimate includes 536,000 SGF for priority capital improvement. These projects would be paid for through reappropriated funds, but the LBC lapsed these funds. Item 2, the Lansing Future Museum stabilization. Agency estimates estimate includes 490,000 SGF to perform stabilization repairs of select buildings at the old maximum security unit in Lansing. This project will be paid for through reappropriated funds, which the LBC did not lapse. Item number 3, the LCF Career Campus. Agency estimate includes 20 million SGF for the Lansing Career Campus. These funds will be used as matching funds to leverage an additional 20 million in private donations. The 24 legislature appropriated 10 million SGF for the Career Campus in 24 and 10 million SGF in fiscal year 25. But due to the funds being appropriated late in the fiscal year, the agency was unable to secure the matching funds. So the 10 million SGF appropriated in 24 was carried over. The LBC lapsed those funds. Item 4, the Kansas Correctional Industries. Agency estimate includes 11 million, all from special revenue funds for expenditures by KCI. Item 5, facility rehab and repair. Agency estimates 5 million with 4.3 million from CIBF and 694,000 from SIBF for facility rehab and repair projects. Can I move on to fiscal year 26 capital improvements?
Yeah, let's go to 26.
Okay, and then a majority of them are the enhancement requests, except for item 1, the Kansas Correctional Industries. Agency request includes 660,000, all from the special revenue funds for the continued expansion and maintenance of private industries. And item 2, facility rehab and repair. Agency request includes 5.2 million with 4.3 million from SIBF and 913,000, 4.3 million from the CIBF and 913,000 from the SIBF for facility rehab and repair. And then projects 3 through 8 are the enhancement requests. Are there any questions?
Any questions on capital improvements for 26? All right, thank you very much. We will move on to the agency.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Keith Bradshaw. I'm Executive Director of Contracts and Finance. So I'll be going over the agency's request as well as the governor's recommendation. I will say that our presentation here will include all the correctional facilities. It's not broken out separately as staff are presenting, just so you're aware of that. I'm sorry. All right. Okay, so briefly, I'll talk a little bit about the population projections, as that does have an impact on our budget. I lost it again. We'll go through the changes in the legislative approved budget, which Nicole touched on a little bit. The recommendations coming out of the special committee for legislative budget, and as well as the governor's recommendation. So regarding the population, as many of them in the committee will recall, during COVID, when the courts shut down, our admissions to the correctional system declined pretty significantly, while releases continued to occur at the same rate as before. So that led to a pretty significant drop in the population. Starting in 2022, as the courts opened back up, that population began to grow. And between 2022 and FY 2024, our population increased by 14.5%. With the fiscal year 24 population at the end of the year reaching 9,404. Of this, 8,551 of that is the male population, which increased 4.8% in a 12-month period. And then the female population at 853 increased by 11.2%. As of this last, on January 23rd, our population was at 9,609, or 2.2% above where we started at the beginning of the fiscal year. The next few graphs are just a depiction based the Sensing Commission's projections over the next 10 years, which are illustrated in orange, with the blue portion of the line being actuals for the prior fiscal years, where you can see that dip from the COVID decline in the population. The gray line represents where our current capacity is at. So as of today, we have 10,800 beds total within the system. Based on the Sensing Commission's population projections, we will we'll begin to exceed our capacity by sometime in fiscal year 2028. And that holds true for the male population as well, with the 9,868 beds we have available for the male population today. Again, we will exceed our capacity sometime during fiscal year 2028 based on these projections. For the female population, the Sensing Commission is projecting a steeper, greater increase in the female population, reaching reaching the point where we'll exceed capacity sometime during fiscal year 2026. The current capacity at Topeka Correctional Facility is 932 beds. So moving into the changes from the legislative approved budget. Normally we don't cover this in past years, but I know this was a topic of discussion with the Legislative Budget Committee. So I just wanted to touch on this a little bit. Again, because we're looking at this as a system view instead of individual facilities, as you look at the individual facilities, you'll see some pretty significant changes from the legislative approved budget to the agency's request, and that's because of some of the transfers that occurred as well as the reappropriations. So total, we had $54.2 million in reappropriations for fiscal year 25. The bulk of that was in the Juvenile Evidence-Based Programs Fund. And if you recall, these are the savings that have been realized through the reduction of incarceration of youth in the juvenile correctional facility and the declined use of group homes in Kansas. And so this balance accumulated at a rather rapid pace, probably faster than anyone anticipated when Senate Bill 367 was initially passed in 2016, and the Juvenile Justice Oversight Commission needed some time to get themselves organized, learn what all programs are out there, what are most evidence-based programs and most effective, to make some good decisions on what programs to fund. And so that balance is projected to be utilized over the next several years as the JJOC determines what are the most effective programs. Also included in the reappropriations were several appropriations made very late in the session. KDOC did not have time to expend those funds, including the matching funds for the career campus, $2.5 million for a regional juvenile substance abuse treatment facility in South Central Kansas, and funding to support the prison museum at the Lansing Correctional Facility. Again, the transfers, some of this goes into the shrinkage rate reductions as well as premium pay, new uniforms for staff. A lot of this is funding that's appropriated to the KDOC budget with the intent that we would make the decision on how to allocate those funds between all the facilities. So you'll see, for example, the funding for shrinkage rate reductions appropriated to KDOC, and then we make the transfers to individual facilities for their share of that funding. So that's why you'll see some of those big drops on the central office budget versus big increases on facility budgets. The two significant departures from the agency's request that the Legislative Budget Committee had made was the removal of premium pay funding of $1.2 million. This was appropriated during the 2024 session in FY25 to pay select officers, those who are working in a restrictive housing post, those assigned to our special operations response teams, and those who are certified interpreters, an additional $1 an hour premium pay. And that goes into effect this year. And the LBC's recommendations, those funds are pulled back out of the 2026 budget. And then there's a series of reappropriation sweeps that Nicole had mentioned. The first one, again, is the Evidence-Based Programs Fund. I will point out if those funds were to be lapsed, then there's programs that we would need to terminate this fiscal year. The current spending plan for the JJOC anticipates spending this balance down by 2027. Again, gives them time to evaluate all the programs that are being funded to determine what are the most effective ones and what would continue with the base appropriation that's built into our budget. And so lapsing those funds would accelerate that, and we would start having to make those tough decisions almost immediately. The next two items, purchase of services and KJCC, just represents those savings from reduced incarceration and group home usage. Those funds have already been transferred into the evidence-based programs fund. That is a requirement of the Senate Bill 367. So those funds are no longer there. They are part of the evidence-based program fund now. On the Lansing Career Campus, LAPS, if you recall, the governor's recommendation last fiscal year was for $20 million in FY25. Again, as matching funds for this to leverage private donations to build a career campus at Lansing. The legislature divided that up in two separate payments. Of course, that first, or appropriations rather, and that first $10 million reappropriated. I will say that our campaign consultant we've been working with in developing a fundraising plan has mentioned to us and told us multiple times that the potential donors expect that any beneficiary, and in this case, the state of Kansas, if they're going to contribute funds to a project, they would expect some contribution from the beneficiary. That's where the $20 million came from. Initially, the expectation that the state would chip in 50% of the total cost. And so lapsing of those funds now would send a message as we're getting ready to start that fundraising campaign this year that the state's not serious about this initiative here and could compromise that private funding. The funding for the the regional inpatient juvenile substance abuse treatment facility, the $2.5 million, again, appropriated very late in the fiscal year before KDOC could be invoiced for that. Since then, the mayor has acquired the land, invoiced KDOC, and we've already paid that invoice. Those funds are no longer available. The priority capital projects was a $4 million appropriation that had been made to help address some of the rehab and repair projects within our correctional facilities. This was an unspent balance at the end of the year that rolled forward. We've since then either expended or have contracts obligating around $170,000 of those funds. The balance is already been earmarked for other projects that are in either design phase or getting ready to go out to bid, with some of that being held in reserve for any potential change orders that comes up as a project's underway and things are discovered that we did not anticipate. On the equipment replacements, $15,600. It's a relatively small amount of the main appropriation we received. These are funds that we use to replace worn out data security equipment, including radios, protective vests, helmets, and so forth. And while a small amount, this is enough to allow us to replace 20 protective vests for our staff. Those do need to be replaced on a regular basis as the plates themselves expire, and then the material of the vest, the carriers start to deteriorate over time. Every one of our security staff is offered the opportunity to receive a vest. And then with the facility reappropriations totaling a little over $1 million for each facility, this is maybe 1% of their total fiscal year 24 budget. So it's not a large amount for each individual facility. But what we did here is pulled that, transfer those funds over to central office into our vehicle replacement fund to allow us to replace 16 more worn out vehicles this fiscal year rather than pushing those off to future years. And that does include the replacement of a hub transport bus that has approximately 400,000 miles on that. So again, a good portion of this has already been expended or obligated, or we're getting ready to place orders on that. Moving on to the governor's recommendation, it's very high level, and Nicole already touched on some of this, is $5.4 million in the current fiscal year to help support medical costs. And then in FY26, we have about $14 million in the governor's recommendation from State General Fund for the healthcare services, food service contract, and deferred rehab and repair projects, and then $11 million out of the State Institutions Building Fund for those two projects at Lansing. So I'll spend a little time on our health services budget. It's our second largest expense behind facility operations, and an expense that we're constitutionally required to provide to the resident population. We have four main components of the healthcare budget, the largest being the contract with Centurion for medical and mental health services. We also have funding set aside for Medicaid expenses for those residents who are admitted to the hospital for more than 24 hours and who are otherwise qualified for Medicaid, as well as pharmacy costs. And then we have a contract with KU Med Center to provide contract oversight and compliance. Regarding our contract with Centurion, this went into effect on July 1st of 2020. It's a comprehensive healthcare contract covering all medical and mental health services. It's a full risk contract where the vendor is responsible for all costs of care, the exception being those services that are provided and covered by Medicaid. Including the contract is 477 contract employees. And because when this contract was bid and awarded at the very start of the pandemic, no one at that time knew where salaries were going to go. At that time, there's been some pretty significant salary escalation in the healthcare industry that all corrections agencies and the healthcare industry in general has been experiencing. So this past summer, Centurion approached KDOC about a increase in pricing for the final 2 years of the contract. The initial ask was about $32 million total over 2 years to cover off-site healthcare cost increases as well as to increase salaries for their staff to be more competitive with the market. So KDOC staff and our team from KU Med Center reviewed the proposal. We were in agreement that the salary structure that they were proposing was adequate and reasonable given the market. We have been struggling to fill some critical positions in nursing, behavioral health professionals, and in medical and mental health providers. The off-site care costs, we did review that, felt that was a little bit higher than what Centurion was asking and negotiated that downward. So we built into the contract about a 14% increase for off-site health care in 25 and another 4% for fiscal year 2026. We came to agreement on terms over the fall and entered into the new extension on November 1st. And so again, what this contract extension does, it does provide for funding to be competitive in the marketplace in the healthcare industry. And just as an example of the immediate impact this has had, just this last month, our Centurion has been able to hire 18 new behavioral health professionals. 10 of those individuals had previously worked for Centurion at one of our correctional facilities and have come back. They initially left because of the pay, and they're coming back because Centurion is now more competitive, and we're able to bring those experienced staff who know our system, know our population back into the fold. We also recently, this week, were notified that we have a psychiatrist and a PhD level psychologist that have been hired for El Dorado. Those positions have been open for some time because now Centurion is able to offer a more competitive salary with the marketplace. Again, the contract includes additional funding for a modest increase in the off-site healthcare. And then another component of this to help reduce the total ask coming from the department was a carve out of the pharmacy services. So previously under the contract, all pharmaceuticals were the responsibility of the vendor, with the exception of the hepatitis C treatments, which KDOC purchased directly to leverage 340B savings. With the carve out of the pharmacy services, we're able to leverage additional savings through 340B program, as well as reduce the overall profit margin and overhead costs on the contract. So those savings were then reinvested into the contract and reduced the total amount of the request for the agency. We did have some additional non-financial terms that we incorporated into the contract in exchange for the agreement to increase the pricing. That includes 2 new performance guarantees, bringing the total number of metrics that our KU team looks at to 14. And these are performance metrics that the vendor is expected to reach a 90% compliance rate on each month. And any of those metrics that fall below that rate, there's a monthly penalty for each event below that 9% threshold. So we did add in there 2 areas where there had some concern. That was behavioral health and dental services. Provide a little bit more assurance that the services the states are getting, or we're getting the services that we're paying for. We've also been piloting a AI-based suicide screening tool at El Dorado. The contract includes in there provisions that if this proves to be an effective tool, that Centurion expand this to other facilities. And then some clarification language that Centurion is required to perform psychological evaluations in accordance with the Sexually Violent Predator Act. So at the end of the day, the total increase to the KDOC healthcare budget is about 5.8% in the current year. And in FY 26, it'll be a 5.7% increase. Again, as I mentioned, this is not unique to Kansas. Correctional systems across the country have been struggling with these escalating salary costs and medical costs. Some of the states that have recently had to renegotiate or rebid their contracts include Missouri, who negotiated their contract almost a year ago and experienced a 10.7% increase in their healthcare costs as a result of that. In Arkansas, they rebid their contract last fall. The new vendor that they awarded to, the price on that increased their total healthcare cost by 24.8%. And then Georgia, where they had to, their vendor at the time walked away from the contract. So they had to make an award under an emergency procurement. And their contract drove their healthcare costs up by 32%. And a few other states that have had to rebid or renegotiate their contracts saw increases of 26 to 37%. So I say that to mean that while we didn't want to have to come and ask for additional funding for this contract, we think we've got a very good deal here, a contract that does provide good quality care to the population, ensures that we maintain staffing at the appropriate levels. And given the experience of some of these other states and what they saw, we're confident that if we had to go out to rebid this contract at the time, we would absolutely have been paying much more than we are today for a new contract. Also in the governor's recommendation, again, as Nicole pointed out, was additional funding for the food service contract. Our current vendor is Aramark Correctional Services. Again, about 102 contract employees. We have about 530 resident workers assigned to the kitchen, plus 26 industry workers who make minimum wage hourly rate. Where, because the population increased and projected CPI increase of 4%, we are asking for an additional $1.7 million to fully fund the contract. Absent this funding, we would have to look at other areas within the facility agency budget to pay for this necessary service. Again, the $4 million for deferred rehab and repair projects. We have in our 5-year plan about $48.5 million worth of identified needs at our facilities. Total projects identified for FY26 is $12.9 million worth of projects that we identified as needing to be done in the next fiscal year versus $4.2 million available. So the additional $4 million will allow us to address some of those projects and reduce the number that we have to defer to out to future fiscal years. And then lastly, we had the 2 projects at Lansing, the first one being raising some of the structures at the old maximum compound and then some of the old living units on the at the old east unit where the east campus is currently located. The buildings are used by the museum, of course, would stay, but the other structures, 2 of the walls and the warehouse, which is built into one of the wall, would come down and the warehouse replaced with a 25,000 square foot warehouse. Again, that's $11 million coming from the State Institutions Building Fund. And then lastly, just quickly on the career campus, again, the old facility needs to come down so we have the space to construct a new facility or a new career campus there. The 501c3 that was created, the legislation that created the 501c3 included language in there that capped the state match at 25%. We caught this after last session when we were speaking to a 50% match as recommended by our campaign council. So we are seeking legislation to change that to 50%, but we're also asking for consideration for proviso in the appropriations bill, change that to 50% match. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll close and stand for any questions.
Any questions for Keith? Looks like you killed it. Oh, Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions. First off, great presentation. Thank you for all the information. We did have a discussion in the Joint Corrections and Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee about nursery at the Topeka Correctional Facility. And I know that in our recommendations, we supported continued conversations about that. And I was wondering, I know it was going to be earlier this year. Have there been any further discussions?
I'll probably defer to Jennifer King on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jennifer King. I'm the Executive Director of Public Affairs. Mr. Chairman, yes, ma'am. There have been further discussions. In fact, we have actually developed what we are calling a working group composed of both Department of Corrections, official subject matter experts, and advocates and nonprofit organizations in the facility, in the community. Our next meeting is scheduled, I believe, please don't quote me on this, I think it's February the 4th or the 6th. So we'll be meeting at TCF. We've currently gotten to the point where we are actually talking about what it would look like physically. We think we'll probably be looking at approximately a 10-bed facility. We do plan to have a separate laundry room strictly for the mothers and their children, a kitchenette, obviously a play area. We would obviously consult with young adult or young children educational professionals to get the proper environment for mental growth for babies. One of the things that we haven't yet decided on is how long the child will stay with the mother. But you can expect further information throughout the session as we continue to move forward on that.
Thank you. I appreciate the update. My other question is going to be budget related here.
I'm going to step aside,
Yes, I
Mr.
think. This morning, in appropriations, there was a line item for the Larned State Hospital for fire contractual services with the city of Larned, and that did not get funded. And so, even though we have an existing contract, July 1, 2024, and so we did say we would discuss it in this committee as part of Kansas Department of Corrections, though I did look at the contract between the city and the state, and it does say that the state hospital is responsible for paying our portion of that contract for the fire services. So I was just wondering how involved the Department of Corrections is with these fire services, and would appreciate any guidance on the importance or how we could move forward with that contract.
You're correct. There is a contract now in place for the Larned Fire Department to provide fire protection services to the Larned campus. Historically, the state hospital has always provided that coverage for the entire campus. I can't speak to what transpired to lead them to go consult with the city about coverage there. But during those discussions, because the state hospital had always included the correctional facility in their coverage, that they would include in the contract with the city, that correctional facility would be a part of that. I don't have any more details beyond that, other than absent that contract and the coverage from the city, we wouldn't have any fire protection services within that Larned campus there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like some guidance, I guess, then from staff, because I would propose to offer it to this budget in order to keep it going through the process, but contractually, I don't believe that the Department of Corrections has anything really to, they're not the ones that are responsible for paying that contract to the city.
I'm getting a head shake that that's correct. Any further questions?
Just one more on that. How important is this fire protection services to the correctional facility?
If I understand correctly, without that contract, there would be no fire protection services.
Any further questions? All right, Representative Delperdang. And Keith, is your mic on?
I believe so.
Okay, sorry.
I'm not even sure who to address this to. I'm on page 5 of this document where it just gives the budget request. But when we get into the medical and the food services and the medical building and everything, it's like the Legislative Budget Committee pulled it all out of there. So in light of what we've heard, how do you remove the budget for food and medical? I mean, something's missing here, so.
Yeah, so the LBC, I mean, it was one big sweeping motion, and pretty much what that did is send it back to the subcommittee, so that'll be our decision. All right. If there's no further questions, thank you very much, Keith. That will Is Randy here to speak to community corrections briefly?
Chairman Anderson and committee. I'm Chrisanne Phipps. I'm the Director of Community Corrections. I'm in replace of Randy Regier. So here I have this. My presentation should have been submitted to you yesterday, I believe it was. Yeah. Huh? They do? Okay.
Yeah, we have handouts.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for having us today, or myself today. I am representing the Kansas Community Corrections Association. On the second page of the handout, you'll see briefly that Community Corrections, we're a unique agency. We are not under the Office of Judicial Administrations like our counterparts, court services. We are actually under the executive branch, Kansas Department of Corrections, and we are separate from parole. We supervise moderate and high-risk felony probation. We supervise presumptive prison and presumptive probation cases. And our clients are assigned to us from district court. Our counterparts, court services, who again are under the Office of Judicial Administration, they serve misdemeanor probation and low-risk felony probation. Community corrections, we are county employees, and our pay scales are set by the county. Even though our funding source comes through Kansas Department of Corrections, we are actually county employees. And so we rely on that funding from the Kansas Department of Corrections. We are governed by county policies, but we're also required to follow standards set forth by Kansas Department of Corrections. Our counties do provide in-kind services and support and assistance such as HR or accounting, IT services. And then some counties do provide cash assistance. And we're also guided by our advisory boards and county commissioners. Intensive supervision is what we provide to our communities, and we do that through reducing risk and identifying risk factors through evidence-based programming. And our goal is to target change so we can continue to monitor and our clients in the community versus sending them to prison. Does everybody have the handout? Okay. So one of the reasons why we're here is to show you the cost avoidance between probation services, community corrections, supervision, and prison. To supervise a probationer on community corrections, you're looking at $11.41 per day versus housing somebody in prison at $106.18 per day. I can tell you I'm from the 8th Judicial District, which that is Geary County, Dickinson County, Marion, and Morris counties, and I supervise anywhere between 38% of our caseload to 43% of our caseload are folks that should have been in prison, that were presumptive prison, but the court did a departure and placed them on community supervision. And so we're getting a lot more bang for our buck when we're supervising those offenders in the community. And that's why we're here, is to continue to request that support from our legislative partners. So on the next page, you see an example of Reno County. Their average supervision assignment length is about 20 months, and the average underlying prison sentence is 32 months. And in this situation, incarceration costs nearly 15 times as much as community corrections. So our statewide success rates For a 5-year success rate, we're at 72.6%. 27.7% of those cases assigned in FY 2021 were presumptive prison at sentencing. Over 19,000 people diverted from prison at a 4-year span from FY 19 to FY 2023. I can tell you I have a higher success rate with my probationers that were presumptive prison. I have a higher success rate with keeping them in the community than I do those that are just presumptive probation. Because we're supervising them at a higher rate or higher risk, and they're getting more of our services. So I'm here for a funding request of $1.5 million for additional officers. We have been working on this plan for the past 3 years. This is for phase 2 of our 3-year plan to add 51 officers statewide. Additional officers reduces our caseload size. Right now, in the 8th Judicial District, we're running with a caseload of around 40 per officer, per ISO. Lower caseloads would allow more time to focus on behavior change rather than compliance driven supervision. So we can look at targeting those criminogenic needs versus reacting and just putting them in jail. More officers means improved outcomes, less recidivism, and safer communities. We're also asking for $1.5 million for our behavioral health grants. The behavioral health grant has been at $3 million for over 10 years. There's 31 judicial districts in the state of Kansas. So imagine how far $3 million goes toward over 31 judicial districts. Additionally, funding provides more mental health, substance abuse, and behavior change interventions for our probationers. And services and assistance for probationers is decreasing due to rising costs of services. Thank you.
Any questions? Representative Howell.
Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, Chair. So on the $1.5 million ask for the behavioral health grants, who would be dispensing these funds?
It would be Kansas Department of Corrections dispenses it out to the judicial districts.
Okay, so it would go to the, I'm just thinking of this kind of like an org chart in my mind, I'm trying to. So it would go to the courts, basically, into the court system from the KDOC?
It would come to community corrections. So community corrections, we are employed by the county. So we don't work for the court. Our probationers come to us from the court, but we are not under district court. We are under the county. So I'm an employee of Geary County, but my funding comes through the Kansas Department of Corrections, and I supervise those probationers that come to me from district court that are sentenced to community corrections.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, not Randy. My question is with respect to the success rates. Would you happen to know what the alternative success rate, in other words, what the success rate is for those that go to prison?
I do not know what.
Would that recidivism
somebody who's
opposite of that rate is? I'm just,
out of prison?
yeah, yes, that doesn't go back. So it would be the opposite of what, would be the recidivism rate. I'm just curious as to, do we have, less than a 25% recidivism rate? What is that? Do we know? For those that actually go to prison, is there anyone?
That would be a Department of Corrections.
Yeah.
I do not know what their success rate is.
And I'm curious because at 72.6% in 5 years seems like a relatively high number. And if that's the case, then how do we make the case reasonable to send those individuals to prison if, and this is not necessarily a question, I'm making a statement, and certainly to my colleagues, how do we make the case to send individuals to prison if prison doesn't seem to have the same success rate as the community corrections? Just a question that's posed, and I'd be real interested in getting an answer with respect to the percentages of what the success rate is for a prison sentence.
Any further questions? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, that will close the budget hearing on Department of Corrections. We will move on to Lansing Correctional Facility.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. Nicole Rencher again, presenting the Lansing Correctional Facility budget. If you turn to page 2, we can get started on the fiscal year 25 analysis. The 25 approved amount was 46.3 million, and the agency request was 51.4 million. This is an increase of 5 million or 10.9%. The changes that the agency had were the reappropriations. Agency carried over 425,000 in unspent special revenue funds, which the agency plans to use for capital improvement projects. There were no supplemental requests. Item 4 on page 3, agency added 3 million SGF to reduce the shrinkage allocation to 5%. This action does not increase the total state budget. Funds were transferred from KDOC's central office budget. This is what I mentioned in the central office budget, where you'd see the corresponding increase in the facilities. Item 5, there's also shift differential adjustment. Agency deleted 907,000 SGF in salaries, and the deletion incorporates previously approved shift differential pay to base pay in fiscal year 25. You're going to see this in a lot of the other facilities as well. Item 6, the agency added 2.4 million SGF and 27 FTE for new units. So the agency recently reopened the maximum security units and opened the East Campus at LCF. So the maximum security units were closed when vacancy rates were high and population was down, but the medium and maximum units at the other facilities, which they were when the agency was closed down, they moved all of the inmates over to other facilities, but then those facilities are at or near full capacity, and so reopening these units will add 384 high custody beds, and then the East Campus provides for an additional 200 minimum custody residents, with a majority of residents participating in an enhanced alcohol and drug treatment program. The FTE positions are shifted from other correctional facilities in the Kansas statewide correctional system. So in a majority of the facilities, you will see a deletion of, traditionally 1 to 2 is typical. Some of them have a little bit more. Item 7, inmate incentive pay. Agency added 961,000 SGF for increases in inmate incentive pay. Increases due to the 24 legislative approved requests to increase inmate incentive pay and the addition of the new inmates at the newly reopened unit. For all other adjustments, the agency deleted 386,000 SGF. Are there any questions for fiscal year 25 before I move on to fiscal year 26?
Any questions on 25? Let's move on. Representative Foy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to make sure that this is this might be, I might have flipped ahead to the next year, so I'll hold off. Thank you.
Fiscal year 26, so the fiscal year 25 approved was 46 million. The agency request was 51.7, 51.8. So this is an increase of 6 million or 12.7% from the approved. There were no enhancement requests. The changes were the shrinkage reduction that you saw in the previous fiscal year. The agency added 3 million SGF. Item 2, the shift differential adjustment again, agency deleted 907,000 SGF. Item 3, opening the new units, agency added the 2.9 million and 27 FTE. Item 4, the inmate incentive pay, agency added 997 for increases in inmate incentive pay. For all of their adjustments, the agency deleted 123,000 SGF for all of their adjustments. And then item 6, the premium pay, which Keith brought up in his presentation, the LBC recommendation included deleting 197,000 SGF for premium pay for bilingual officers assigned to restrictive housing units and special operations response teams. I can go over very quickly the capital improvement section before
Let's
any
do that.
questions. Okay, just very quickly, the agency submits a revised estimate of 425,000, all from the Correctional Institutions Building Fund. These are all reappropriated funds, and then the agency or the facility does not have any capital improvement requests, which will be the same for all of the facilities.
All right, any questions? All right, I think that's all. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Norton.
Okay, turning to page 2 for the fiscal year 25 analysis. The 25 approved amount was 25 million, with the agency request being 27 million, which is an increase of approximately 2 million or 7.6%. There were no SGF reappropriations, but the agency did carry over 231,000 in unspent correctional institutions building funds, which the agency plans to use for capital improvement projects. There were no supplemental requests. Other changes, the item 4, the agency added 3.4 million SGF to reduce the shrinkage allocation. This action does not increase the total state budget. Again, the funds are transferred from the KDOC central office. Item 5, the shift differential adjustment, agency deleted 1.8 million SGF in salaries. Deletion adds previously approved shift differential pay to base pay. And the adjustment to base pay at Norton is below the previous estimate, partially attributable to the shift of personnel from Norton to Lansing, which is described in item 7. So item 6, uniforms, the agency added 164,000 SGF for uniform replacement. The 24 legislature approved a request to provide higher quality, increased quantity of uniforms. The action does not increase the total state budget. Funds are transferred from the KDOC central office. The FTE shift, agency deleted 12 FTE positions and added them to the newly reopened housing unit at Lansing. For all other adjustments, the agency added 200,000, including 195,000 SGF for all other adjustments. Are there any questions for fiscal year 25 before I move on to fiscal year 26?
Let's go to 26.
Okay, fiscal year 26, the 25 approved amount was 25 million, with the agency request being 26.3 million, which is a 1.5 million or 6.1% change from the approved. There were no enhancement requests for the facility. The changes include item number 2, shrinkage reduction. Agency added 3.4 million SGF to reduce the shrinkage allocation. Item 3, the shift differential adjustment. Agency deleted 2.2 million SGF in salaries. Item 4, the FTE shift. The agency deleted 12 FTE positions. Item 5, all other adjustments. The agency added 378,000, including 375,668 SGF for all of their adjustments. Adjustments include increases in contractual services and commodities. The quantities increase is primarily attributable to the clothing and construction materials. And then item 6, the premium pay, the LBC recommendation includes deleting 141,658 SGF for premium pay for bilingual officers. Can I move on very quickly to the capital improvements? Okay, agency submits a revised estimate of 231,000 in capital improvement expenditures. These are all reappropriated funds, and then there are no capital improvement requests for fiscal year 26.
Any questions on Norton? Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would, well, I guess, are we going to get any further presentations on these? I don't think so. So I did want to go back to the premium pay for bilingual officers, because I'm trying to find where I thought I noted something and I just can't find it. So I did want to get further information from the agency on that, please.
Mr. Chair, regarding the premium pay, so this is something that was negotiated in the most recent COAS agreement. And to clarify, it's an additional $1 per hour for officers who are assigned to a restrictive housing unit. So that's their work assignment for that day, not individuals who might be walking in to deliver mail or meals or whatever, just those who are actually assigned to the unit. Those who are on the special operations response teams, and then those individuals who go through and are certified to be a bilingual individual. So they'll go through a test. We have working on an agreement with a outside vendor to have individuals who are interested in signing up for that go through a test to verify and certify that they are bilingual in the language that they're say that they are, and then they would qualify for that extra $1 per hour for the premium pay.
Are they able to translate as well, be translators?
That's the intent, so they would be available on shift to help translate with some of our population.
And so with the elimination of this item, does that mean that those individuals would receive a pay cut?
In theory, that could be a possibility. In reality, I think that's just something the agency would have to figure out
Okay.
to make that work.
Thank you.
So it'd be a cut somewhere else in our budget we'd have to absorb.
Okay, that just seems like a very strong skill to have. Thank you.
Representative Howell.
Thank you, Chair. My question was the same as the previous, so thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Delperdang.
And I'm fine waiting. I've got a question if we can back up to Lansing, and if you don't want to do that at this point, I'm fine. So, okay, if you don't mind, under the Lansing Correctional Facility, I'm on page 6, capital budget and debt. Okay, on there, under the expenditures, you've got capital projects, and, water line, building repair, havoc, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at the agency 2025 versus LBC, the numbers are identical going down through the projects, but yet they total different. Okay. Sorry for backing you up like that.
Fine. That's just something that we can look into and get that fixed, so.
Okay. That's all I need then. Thank you.
Any further? All right. Thank you very much. That will close out our budget hearings for today. We'll move on to recommendations. All right, we will start with the State Fire Marshal. Starting with FY 2025, I move the LBC's recommendation HB 2007 for the State Fire Marshal FY 25. Can I get a second? Seconded by Delperdang. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, 2025 is approved. Moving on to FY 2026. I move the LBC's recommendation HB 2007 for FY 26 for the State Fire Marshal. Can I get a second? Any discussion? No discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, FY 25 and 26 for the State Fire Marshal was approved. We will close the recommendation for State Fire Marshal, and we will move on to the KBI. All right, for FY 2025 for the KBI, I move the LBC's recommendation HB 2007 with a couple adjustments, adding back in the SGF reappropriation in FY 2025, and going along with the governor's request of moving the $3,050,000 debt service to the Department of Administration to pay the bonds. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion? If no discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Moving to 2026, I move the LBC's recommendation HB 2007 with the following adjustments, adding back in the offender registration compliance at $500,000, agreeing with the governor on the $3,050,000 debt service, KBI cybersecurity positions, the 2 FTEs, and the $355,363 the governor recommended, and the governor's recommendation on the laboratory infrastructure at $500,000. And then also adding language recommending that the KBI continue working with the legislature to find a lease space. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? No discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right. 2025 and 26 KBI is approved. Moving on to the State 911 Board. All right. Opening the recommendation on the State 911 Board, I move the LBC's recommendation HB 2007 for FY 2025. Can I get a second? All right, seconded. Any discussion? No discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, moving on to 2026. Chris, do you have that? Yes, please. Thank you. All right, if everyone has the proposed amendment for the State 911 Board, this is what we heard yesterday. This is the graphing maps, looking at graphing schools here in the state. I'll give everyone a chance to peek at that. And I will make a motion. I move the LBC's recommendation HB 2007 with the following adjustment, adding this amendment to FY 2026 with the dollar amount of $2 million. Can I get a second? Okay, any discussion? Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just note that the agency didn't make any enhancement requests, and for me personally, I am not going to be supportive of this enhancement request because I think, one, it's not going to cover, every school and facility, and we'd have to pick and choose. And number two, there are a number of current contracts that we're in with the state that have not been funded for the current fiscal year and beyond. And so I'm very hesitant to adopt a new put out a new RFP for a new contract for something that wasn't an enhancement request.
Thank you. I'll just make a note. I do think the intent is to cover all schools at some point, but anything we can do for school safety in this state, I support. Representative Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that in mind, how do we make that distinction? How do we choose the schools? Who makes that choice?
Chris, do you have?
So in the proviso, it prioritizes who the grants should go to, with public or private elementary school or secondary schools being in that list. A Kansas PSAP can apply to the program for a grant. They can apply to the state 911 board, so it'd be up to them to then issue the grant to provide those services.
And you said public and private. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And that's kind of in the middle in paragraph 1, or what the provision 1.
Thank you.
My understanding is this amendment should cover approximately about a third of the state. Any further discussion? Representative Delberding.
And reading this is, it will just be for the schools, or it's state buildings, or it's hospitals, because it looks like a lot of these get mentioned in here.
Chris.
Yeah, so again, kind of in the middle, it prioritizes grants to the following facilities in this order. So any public or private elementary school or secondary school, any public post-secondary state educational institution, government buildings, mass gathering sites, and healthcare facilities. So PSAP with any of those facilities in their area can apply for a grant to map those facilities.
And then on that same question there, that would be the upfront to get it in there. Is there also monies available for the ongoing maintenance? Because a lot of these layouts and buildings change on a regular basis.
Yeah, so my discussions with this group is the ongoing maintenance will be put back on the locals, and it's about $500 to update.
Per building? Or
Yes,
per map?
yeah,
if you
and
would.
that only needs to occur if there's an update to the building. Any further discussion? Representative Carr.
I do have a follow-up. It states that preferences will be given to. Is that based on the time that they apply for the grant, or are there just preferences that will be given to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the preference would be the type of facility. So school facilities would be prioritized first for grants, and then going down the list from there.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Hoy.
I'm just wondering if we do, because I do, like I said, I have some issues with not offering enough funding for all schools to participate should they want to do this. I'm wondering if you said this would cover a third. Should we just make the appropriation, if it's going to go in there, so that it would be able to cover all schools?
Thanks. Yeah, with my amendment, I think kind of starting out as a pilot, and we'll do 2 million now and see how it goes, and if it's successful, we'll cover the state. Any further discussion? Representative Carr.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I would like to piggyback on what my colleague had to say. Oftentimes pilot programs overlook certain districts and certain, in this case, schools. So I would agree that I would be more inclined to vote for this amendment if this amendment made it possible for all of the schools to participate, as opposed to those that were just chosen by preference. And I understand that the preference means that there are different things that fall in line under the schools, but if the dollar amount is then limited, if everyone applies, excuse me, then how do we dictate and differentiate between that preference? And that's where I have an issue with this amendment. I, as my colleague would like to just fund this completely so that all of the schools, in fact, would be able to benefit from this service. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then, based on the previous comments, I would like to make a substitute motion that the priority be given to public and private elementary school or secondary schools and any post-secondary state educational institution, and leave it just those two, and increase that to $6 million to fund, offer that funding to be available for all those schools.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I will just say, I think this, after seeing what we saw yesterday in the presentation, I think this is a great program, and I do want to cover the whole state at some point with how the budget is this year, and we're trying to keep it tight. I think if we go to the full 6 million, I don't know if it will make it through the process. I'd rather take one step in the right direction and cover a third of the state than lose it altogether. So I would oppose the substitute motion. Any further discussion? Okay, if not, all in favor of the substitute motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. I think the noes have it. And the substitute motion fails. Back on the original motion. Any further discussion? All right, no more discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. I think the ayes have it. And we approved State 911 Board FY 2026 with the adjustment. All right, and with that, we'll close the recommendation for State 911 Board. Any further comments?